My son said, "She'll slow us down." So I stayed quiet and booked the presidential suite. Have you ever stood so still in a room full of voices that even your breath felt like an interruption? Have you ever heard someone speak of you like you were furniture useful, but mostly in the way? I was folding towels. That's how it started. Just me folding towels in their sunlit laundry room. Scent of lemon detergent in the air, hands still damp from switching the load. Ezra's favorite bath towel had that little pirate embroidery on the edge. I'd washed it carefully, folded it just the way he liked it, and then I heard it. From the kitchen, 2 rooms away. Lucas, my son, and Rachel, my daughter-in-law. "She'll slow us down." That's what he said. Quiet, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Not cruel, just administrative. Rachel didn't disagree. She was chopping strawberries for the kids' yogurt bowls. I could hear the dull thud of knife against wood, her voice light. As always. "She won't keep up with the excursions, babe. You know how she gets with stairs and heat. It'll just complicate everything." The word complicate. Like I was a typo in their itinerary. I stood there, towel frozen in my hands. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then Lucas said, "Let's just ask her to watch the dog while we're gone. She likes quiet anyway." He said it so gently, so confidently, like he knew I'd nod and smile and say, "Of course, sweetheart, because that's what I always did." But this time something inside me didn't move. Have you ever felt your own usefulness curdle? Like one day the gratitude for your presence just evaporated. Leave a comment if you've ever been invited somewhere, and then uninvited politely. I want to know I'm not the only one. I stayed in that laundry room another 5 minutes, pretended I was checking for sock pairs, pretended I hadn't heard, pretended I wasn't shaking. When I walked out, Rachel smiled at me, tight-lipped and sunny, the kind of smile people use when they're hoping you'll just be agreeable and not ask questions. "Mom, I was just telling Lucas how helpful it's been having you around. The kids love you so much. You've been a lifesaver this week." She said it as if I hadn't heard her just minutes ago say I'd slow them down. Lucas kissed me on the cheek in passing. Ezra ran into my arms. Ruby asked if I could braid her hair like last time. And I did. Because the truth is, I've spent most of my life loving people who only loved the version of me that kept giving. We were supposed to leave in 4 days. A cruise. Western Caribbean. Rachel had texted me months ago. "We're booking the big family cruise, 7 nights. The kids are so excited, you in." I'd replied yes without hesitation. And I meant it. I love the ocean. I love the feeling of nothing to do, nowhere to be. I hadn't been on a cruise in years, not since Howard died. Howard, my husband of 42 years, would have laughed himself silly hearing what came next. Because I didn't just say yes, I offered to pay a share. "Let me book my own room. I want the balcony, the one where you can hear the waves at night." Rachel had waved it off. "Oh no, don't be silly. We've got it all covered. You'll be in with the kids. They'd love that." At the time, it felt generous. Now I realized it was tactical. They had never intended for me to have a place, just a function. That night, after bedtime stories and bath time and one too many rounds of Grandma Watch This, I sat on the guest bed, their guest bed, with a stiff glass of Pinot Noir and a lump in my throat. I pulled up the cruise reservation on my phone. Carnelian Serenity Deck 5. Family cabin. 2 bunks. A shared bathroom. a curtain for privacy, and no balcony. I thought about the week ahead, about being the designated babysitter. The extra hands, the she'll stay behind while we go ziplining placeholder. And I thought, no, not this time. Let me ask you something. If someone keeps making space around you, but never for you, when do you stop waiting to be invited and start inviting yourself? I didn't cry, didn't send a text, didn't slam doors or play the victim. Instead, I opened my old metal filing box, the one I kept tucked deep in the back of my closet, and pulled out an envelope marked Franklin Estelle Inheritance. Private. Howard always told me, make sure you have something with your name on it, not the joint account. Yours. I hadn't touched it in years. $267,000 sitting in a quiet account at a credit union that didn't ask questions. That night I made a call. Royal Sun Voyages. This is Mia. How can I assist you? I need to change a reservation. Of course. Are you modifying your current cabin? No, I'm upgrading. Ma'am, the available upgrades for that sailing are limited. What's the best suite you've got left? Our presidential suite, ma'am. Deck 12. Private terrace concierge premium dining access. It's expensive, I know. Put it on my card. Very well. Would you like to be added to early boarding? Yes. And please don't link me to any family reservations. I'll be traveling alone. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in decades alive. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was the quiet thrill of realizing you still have choices. The next morning, I made pancakes. Blueberry, Ezra's favorite. Rachel complimented the crisp edges. Lucas asked if I'd mind doing pickup from camp. It's your last few days with the kids before the trip, he said, not unkindly. You'll get some real rest once we're gone. I smiled, and I thought, yes, I will. Just not the kind of rest you're imagining. That afternoon, I pulled my old suitcase out of the attic, the good one, with leather trim and whisper quiet wheels. It still smelled faintly of lavender sachets. Inside, I packed not what was expected, but what was mine. The navy jumpsuit I'd never worn because it looked too formal. 2 sundresses I once considered too bold. A bottle of perfume that hadn't seen sunlight since Howard's funeral. A silk sleep mask. A paperback copy of The Mists of Avalon. I'd never gotten past chapter 3. My own bottle of good bourbon. And last, in a gesture I can only describe as mischievous, I packed Howard's old Panama hat. The one he wore on our honeymoon in Curacao. The one that made him look like a retired jazz trumpeter. He would have loved this. Ladies, tell me, do you still pack for other people when you travel? Do you make lists for grown children, worry about who needs snacks or socks or chargers? This time, I packed for me. And I swear to you, it felt like freedom zipped into a suitcase. 2 days before departure, Rachel handed me a list of just-in-case numbers and asked me to stay an extra night with the dog. We'll be out the door by noon on Friday. You don't mind holding down the fort, do you? I nodded. Of course. After all, what could possibly be more fitting? She handed me an extra set of keys. Don't forget to water the spider plant, and maybe walk Captain around the block once or twice. He gets fussy when we're gone. Captain was a 10-pound rescue mutt with the personality of a hungover raccoon. But I smiled. Absolutely, I said. And Rachel? She turned. Have a beautiful trip. She looked pleasantly surprised, maybe even a little guilty, but not enough to say anything meaningful. Friday morning came bright and warm. While they hustled to get the kids ready, Lucas asked, "Are you sure you'll be okay here, Mom? We can ask the neighbor to check in if needed." "Oh, I'll be just fine," I said, pouring myself another coffee. "I've got everything I need." He kissed the top of my head. Rachel waved cheerfully from the driveway, and just like that, they were gone. 25 minutes later, so was I. I didn't go back to the house. Instead, I called a car to the port, checked my reservation on the Royal Sun Voyages app. Suite 1201, Deck 12, Presidential, boarding time 11:00 a.m. I arrived early. The port staff were efficient and kind. "Good morning, Ms. Franklin," the concierge said, reading from his clipboard. "Presidential suite. We've got you pre-cleared and ready to board. Would you like champagne?" "Make it chilled," I replied. He grinned. There's a moment when you walk through the boarding tunnel and feel the blast of air conditioning and possibility. When your luggage isn't being juggled with car seats and backpacks. When no one's asking if you remembered the swim diapers or allergy pills. Just you. A key card. And a ship that doesn't know your history. The hallway to the suite smelled faintly of eucalyptus and new carpet. When the door clicked open, I stepped into something I'd never thought I'd see outside a magazine spread. Cream-colored sofas. A terrace large enough to host a brunch wedding. A king bed dressed in crisp white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealing nothing but endless open ocean. It didn't feel like a vacation. It felt like arrival. Arrival into something I hadn't even realized I'd left behind myself. I stood in the middle of the suite, fingers curled around the room key, and exhaled. Not because I was tired, but because for the first time in years, no one needed anything from me. Have you ever entered a room and known it belonged to you before you even touched a thing? That's what this was. Not because I paid for it, but because I chose it. Chose me. There was a knock. A young man in uniform blazer, pressed shoes, polished, bowed slightly. "Ms. Franklin." "My name is Alejandro. I'll be your personal concierge during the voyage." He stepped inside smoothly. "Would you like your luggage unpacked?" "A tour of the amenities." "We have a champagne tasting at 5, and the chef's table is accepting reservations." I blinked. I think, "I'll take it one thing at a time." He smiled gently. "Of course. That's the beauty of sea time. There's nowhere to be but where you are." I poured myself a glass of the welcome Prosecco and stepped onto the terrace. The sea stretched ahead, glittering and untamed. Below, somewhere families were still boarding. Children arguing about bunk beds. Couples figuring out who forgot the sunscreen. But up here, it was just me. A woman in white linen slacks. A glass of cold sparkle in her hand. And the kind of silence that feels like presence, not absence. They thought I'd be home feeding their dog. Instead, I was watching the horizon and claiming my own damn seat at the table. Not as a helper, not as a backup plan. As me. They thought I'd be home. Watering the spider plant. I was watching the sea from my balcony. The first full morning on board, I woke up before the sun. No barking dog. No cartoon theme songs. No creaky guest mattress or cereal being spilled in a hurry. Just the soft hiss of ocean slipping past the hull. And silence. Glorious, unbroken silence. Do you know what it feels like to wake up and not be needed? Not in the bitter way, not abandoned, but simply free. Leave a comment if you've ever longed for one morning where the only question was, what do I want today? I padded barefoot across the cool marble tiles. The curtains had been left open just slightly, enough for the sunrise to slip through and paint golden stripes across the floor. I made myself coffee from a tiny silver machine on the vanity and figured out the milk frother by sheer will. Real cream, fresh beans, no one watching. No one asking Grandma, is there more sugar? Just me and the rising sun. I stepped onto the terrace wrapped in a hotel robe so thick it could have doubled as armor. Below, the ship moved steady, cutting its way through open water, and I stood there, cup in hand, letting the sea wind untangle something that had been tight in my chest for years. Breakfast came on a silver tray delivered by a woman with kind eyes and good posture. Fresh mango rosemary potatoes, poached eggs, she said, and we added a cinnamon roll. Our chef saw the note you left. I blinked. I didn't leave a note. She smiled. You mentioned yesterday to Alejandro you hadn't had a good one since 1985. He took that as a personal challenge. I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that surprises your ribs, and sat down at the table by the window. The cinnamon roll was perfect, not too sweet. Soft inside, edges crisped just right. I nearly cried. After breakfast, I wandered. No agenda. No leash in one hand, no child in the other. Just me. Deck 10 had a small library tucked behind a piano bar, all brass fixtures and navy leather chairs. I found a battered copy of Rebecca and settled in for 2 chapters. Nobody asked what I was reading. Nobody interrupted to say they were hungry. Nobody told me I was in their seat. It felt radical. Freedom doesn't always look like skydiving or passports. Sometimes it looks like reading a book in a quiet room where no one calls your name. Can you remember the last time you read for pleasure, not escape? Let me know below. I want to hear what book brought you back to yourself. That afternoon, I signed up for a salsa class. Why, I don't even know. The clipboard was just there. Estelle, 76. Salsa. Sure. Why not? I nearly backed out. Told myself my knees would rebel, that I'd trip over someone half my age wearing rhinestones and acrylic smiles. But at 2 orders sharp, I showed up. The instructor was from Havana. Silver-haired, graceful as silk smile like sunlight. He took my hand without hesitation and said, Senora Franklin, we start slowly. But we do start. The music began. My hips remembered more than I expected. The first few steps were stiff. But by the 4th beat, something cracked open. Not the joints, the spirit. Across the dance floor, I caught a glimpse of someone watching a man, late 60s or early 70s maybe, wearing a white linen shirt and loafers with no socks. He didn't stare. He observed. When class ended, he nodded at me once, like he'd seen something. I didn't think much of it then. Later, I'd learn his name. But for now, he was just the first person in a very long time to look at me like I was interesting. That evening, I went to dinner alone. Not the buffet, not the family dining. The adults-only dining room on Deck 9. The maitre d' didn't blink. He didn't say, just one. He simply led me to a corner table by the window and handed me a menu. Welcome, Ms. Franklin. We're glad you're here. Have you ever eaten slowly, really slowly, without anyone waiting on your fork? Without being asked to pass the ketchup, or explain why broccoli matters, or cut someone else's chicken? I had sea bass with lemon butter and a glass of Chardonnay that didn't taste like guilt or someone else's leftovers. And when dessert came, I said yes. To the crème brûlée. To myself. It was only the second day, but I felt something new humming beneath the surface of my skin. A kind of unfolding, not loud, not grand, but real. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on the terrace when I saw them. My family. Down on deck 6 near the kids' splash pool, Rachel, in a sun hat too wide for function, was smearing sunscreen onto Ruby's cheeks with the determination of someone who wanted to enjoy herself, but was already fraying. Ezra was tugging at Lucas's arm, and Lucas, he was arguing with a crew member over something I couldn't hear. Luggage room mix-up. It didn't matter. They hadn't seen me. I didn't wave. Instead, I set down my cup and quietly stepped back inside. Let me ask you something. If you walked into a room and no one noticed you'd arrived, would you announce yourself or simply observe what they look like without your presence? By the time they got to their cabin, lower deck internal room, no windows. I was already halfway through, Rebecca curled up in a chair beside a fruit platter. No noise, no knocking, no one asking if I had a tissue, a charger, or an opinion I wasn't supposed to express. Just me, and quiet. That evening, I went to the captain's welcome gala. Not for them. For me. I wore the navy blouse with the flutter sleeves I'd packed and never worn. Pearl earrings. Lipstick, real lipstick, not lip balm with ambition. The ballroom sparkled with champagne flutes and camera flashes. The captain raised a glass to our guests in the royal suites. And to Ms. Franklin in our presidential suite, welcome aboard. Heads turned. People clapped politely. A few glanced my way. I nodded, once calm. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen not because I was loud, not because I begged, but because I chose to show up on my own terms. That's the kind of power they don't teach us to claim in our 70s. After the gala, I took the long route back to my suite, winding through quiet lounges and low-lit hallways. And there he was again. The man from the salsa class, reading in a corner seat of the Sky View Cafe. Newspaper folded. A neat drink beside him. Panama hat resting on the table. He looked up as I passed, smiled. Subtle. Not the flirtatious kind, the recognition kind. Ms. Franklin, he said. You dance like someone who's remembering how. I smiled back. I read somewhere that everything worth remembering starts in the hips. He chuckled. Clark, he said, extending a hand. Retired journalist. Still curious. I took it. Estelle. Retired everything. Still learning. We didn't talk long. Just enough to feel that rare and beautiful click of being seen and not sized up. He didn't ask if I was married. Didn't tell me about his ex-wife. Didn't explain himself. He just listened. The next morning, I wandered to the art gallery. They had a temporary installation, bold, chaotic pieces that looked like dreams splashed against canvas. I stood beside a woman with silver braids and a linen dress. She pointed at one painting all red and charcoal and said, "Looks like grief to me." Or the moment just after. We talked for half an hour. Her name was Maya. She was traveling solo. Her third cruise. I used to wait for someone to come with me, she said. Now I come and see who shows up. I liked her. At lunch, I skipped the buffet again, went back to the adult dining room, ordered grilled peaches with burrata and a glass of something cold and crisp. The waiter remembered my name, remembered how I liked my water no ice lemon on the side. I nearly wept again. Do you know what it feels like to be remembered? Not for what you provide, but for who you are. A waiter, a concierge, a stranger on a dance floor. Sometimes it takes stepping away from your life to realize how much of you has gone missing inside it. That evening, I returned to the salsa class, and Clark was there. This time, he didn't just watch. He asked me to dance. He didn't lead too hard. He didn't assume I needed instruction. He matched my rhythm, then let me set it. At the end of the song, he said, "We make a good pair. Would you like to join me for coffee sometime?" I paused. Yes, but not out of politeness. Only because I want to. He smiled. I wouldn't want it any other way. That night, back in my suite, I sat barefoot on the terrace with a blanket over my knees and a glass of bourbon in hand. The ship moved steady beneath me. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt seen. Not for my usefulness, not for my title, not for what I could hold together while everyone else lived loudly. Just me. Estelle. They looked right through me. Until I walked in, wearing the Panama hat. It happened on day 4, a formal night. Everyone on the ship was dressed like they had something to prove. Rachel had always loved dressing the part. Structured dresses, coordinated outfits for the kids, Lucas in a sport coat he only wore for photo ops. And this night, the captain's dinner was a photo op. I hadn't planned to be there. But then again, I hadn't planned any of this. Clark found me outside the library that afternoon. "You going to the dinner tonight?" he asked, sipping something fizzy and pink. I shrugged. I wasn't invited. He tilted his head. "You don't need an invitation. You're a guest. You're the presidential suite Estelle." He was teasing, but not really. He offered his arm. "Come as you are. Or come as you were always meant to." That night I stood in front of the mirror holding the Panama hat. Howard's. He wore it to jazz clubs and garden parties. Wore it the night we danced under the paper lanterns at our 40th anniversary. Wore it when he told me, "Promise me you won't shrink into the background after I go." I hadn't kept that promise. Not until now. I pinned up my hair, slipped on the navy jumpsuit, red lipstick, pearl earrings, and the hat. I looked like myself. The version that had waited decades to walk through the world unescorted by guilt. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you walked into a room not asking to be included, but prepared to be seen? Drop a comment below if you've ever felt more alive in your 70s than you did at 40. We entered the dining hall just after 7. Crystal chandeliers, polished silver, laughter echoing off soft piano chords. And there at table 18, my family, Rachel adjusting Ruby's dress. Lucas pouring juice into Ezra's cup. Smiles strained, shoulders tight. A performance of perfection. They hadn't noticed me. Yet. Clark and I were led to a table nearby. Not too close, but close enough. The maître d' greeted me like an old friend. "Miss Franklin, welcome back. Your table is ready." Rachel turned slightly at the name, that twitch of curiosity like someone remembering a voice from a dream. And then she saw me. Her smile faltered, like a record skipped mid-song. Lucas looked up next, his eyebrows lifted. Surprise, not recognition. I held his gaze, didn't wave, didn't smile, just was. There's a power in being the one who didn't disappear, in returning not for them, but in spite of them. Not as the background character, but as the main plot they never saw coming. Clark leaned over. "Shall we toast?" I nodded. "To visibility." We clinked glasses. Rachel was whispering now, her eyes scanning the table chart. I saw her lips move. "She's on this cruise." Lucas reached for his phone. I turned mine off. Dinner was perfect. Seared scallops, roasted fennel, wine that made you forget the taste of obligation. Clark told me about his years covering protests in South America. I told him about Howard, about how I hadn't laughed at dinner in years. Until now. Halfway through dessert, I stood, walked calmly to the restroom past table 18. Ezra looked up first. "Grandma," his voice rang out clear. Rachel turned full face now, mouth open. I stopped just briefly, looked at Ezra, and smiled gently. "Enjoy your dinner, sweetheart." Then kept walking. Didn't pause. Didn't explain. Because you don't owe an apology for not staying where you were sidelined. You don't owe clarity to people who never gave you honesty. And you don't need permission to return to a room you helped build. I returned to my suite just after 9. The moon was out round and impolite, pouring silver light over the ocean like it wanted to illuminate every hidden thing. I slipped off my shoes, hung the Panama hat by the door, and checked my phone. 5 messages. 1 from Rachel, 2 from Lucas, 1 from an unknown number, probably Ruby's new tablet, and 1 from the family group thread where I had been silent for weeks. I didn't open them. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time they were waiting on me. Let me ask you something. When someone only looks for you once they're embarrassed, not once they've made room, does that count as love? Tell me below. I want to know. Is it ever too late for someone to really see you? I slept like a stone that night. No dreams, just breath, just weightlessness. The next morning, Clark met me for breakfast. He didn't ask about the dinner. Didn't ask if those people were my family. Didn't ask why the boy had called me grandma. He just handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You're glowing." And I was. At 10:30, my phone buzzed again. "Rachel." "Mom, can we talk?" "Please, the kids miss you." "We didn't know. We didn't realize." "Please come by the pool deck." I sipped my mimosa, turned my phone face down. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity, because they weren't really asking how I was. They were asking why I wasn't where they expected me. I did go to the pool deck, but not for them. Maya, the woman from the art gallery, had invited me to a poetry reading there. She was reading a piece called Inheritance. It wasn't about money. It was about silence. About women who passed down the habit of being quiet so deeply it showed up in their daughters' bones. I sat in the front row, and I wept. Afterward, Maya hugged me. "You don't owe them your presence just because they noticed your absence." She said it gently, like someone who had learned it the hard way. Later that day, I did respond, not to the texts, to Ezra, my grandson. I found him sitting with a book alone near the children's activity corner. I walked over, sat next to him. He looked up, hopeful. "Are you mad at us?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. I'm just living." He frowned. "But why aren't you with us?" I thought for a long moment. Then I said, "Because sometimes people forget that love isn't the same as obligation. And sometimes grown-ups need to remember how to treat someone they love." He looked at me seriously. "Are you coming back?" I kissed the top of his head. "I never really left. But I'm not walking behind anyone anymore." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just live. Loudly. Kindly. Clearly. And let them witness it from the seats they chose. That evening I dined alone again. Clark had an excursion. Maya joined a painting class. I ordered steak. Rare. Watched the horizon melt from amber to navy, and raised a glass to myself. Not in defiance, not in triumph. In peace. They thought the money was for them. I chose to spend it on my freedom. There's a small banking office tucked behind the luxury shopping corridor on Deck 3. No signs. Just a discreet plaque, Voyage Financial and Trust private consultations by appointment only. I made my appointment on a whim. Or maybe not a whim. Maybe it was the slow accumulation of almosts. Almost appreciated. Almost respected. Almost equal. And I was done with almost. The banker, a soft-spoken woman named Elisa, greeted me with espresso and warm eyes. "Ms. Franklin, you've held an inactive private reserve account since 2009 under the joint trust from your late husband's estate. Shall we review?" I nodded. I hadn't touched that money in over a decade. Not because I forgot, but because I was always waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for the next need. Waiting to make sure someone else was okay first. But no one had been waiting for me. Let me ask you something. How many of us hold back our own safety nets, just in case someone else might fall first? Have you ever saved something? Joy time money for people who never asked how you were doing. We reviewed the figures. It was more than I remembered. Howard had always been prudent. But more than that, he had believed in me. He left that account in my name, with one instruction I'd never really heard until that moment. Use it for whatever makes you feel whole again. So I did. Not all of it, just enough. Enough to retain a financial advisor with no connection to my children. Enough to begin dissolving the joint assets that had been tied too long to obligation. Enough to rewrite my will not as a threat, but as a declaration. Enough to set aside a fund in my name for my use for my peace. And enough to establish something Howard would have approved of, a travel scholarship, not for the grandkids in private school who rolled their eyes at thank you notes, but for underfunded senior women who'd never seen the sea. Elisa asked gently, "Would you like to notify your family of these changes?" I smiled. "Not yet. Let's see who notices I'm not a resource, but a person." She nodded. "For what it's worth, Miss Franklin, this may be one of the clearest declarations of independence I've ever seen." I left the office lighter. Not because the money changed me, but because I finally stopped asking if I was allowed to use what was already mine. That afternoon, I returned to the suite, pulled out the silk scarf I'd brought, but never worn deep plum with gold trim, and tied it in my hair. I looked in the mirror, not to check approval, but to witness presence. You don't have to erase your name to belong. You don't have to disappear to be loved. And you don't have to ask permission to start over. If you needed someone to say that to you today, let this be it. He didn't ask for my story. He waited until I offered it. That evening, I didn't plan anything grand. Just a walk on the upper deck, just me and the sea. The breeze was sharp, but not rude. salt and wind and the sound of something ancient in motion. Clark found me by the railing. Permission to join, I nodded. We walked for a while, not saying much. Some people fill silence like a leaky faucet. Clark wasn't like that. He let space exist between words, and in that space, I felt safe. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you were with someone who didn't make you feel like you had to shrink to be polite? Someone who didn't ask for less of you, but welcomed more. Eventually, we stopped by an empty bench. He turned toward me. You seem different today. Not just peaceful, something else. Lighter. I took a breath. I did something for myself. Something I've been putting off since Howard passed. He didn't press. He just nodded like he understood that some chapters close themselves and others we have to shut with our own hand. I'm glad he said, "It suits you, this steadiness." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I was going to wait, but here, it was a sketch of me, standing by the railing, wind in my hair, hat in hand, not flattering, not polished, just honest. Is this how you see me? I asked. It's how you showed up to me. I smiled. No one's drawn me before. Maybe no one's looked properly. We sat a while longer. The sun dipped below the horizon, flaring gold before it disappeared. I turned to him. Would you like to dance? No music, no ballroom, just the hum of the ship and the rhythm of waves. He stood, held out his hand, and there, barefoot on the deck, wrapped in a scarf that caught the wind like a sail, I danced. Not for a camera, not for approval, not for memory, for now, for me. He didn't lead. He moved with me, like we were both remembering what it felt like to be chosen, not needed, not tolerated, but wanted. And I let myself lean in. Just slightly. Just enough. Later, back in the suite, I opened the safe. Took out a small box with Howard's initials on it. Inside a ring, deep sapphire, his last gift. I placed it back gently, then closed the safe and smiled. Not because I was closing that chapter, but because I was giving myself permission to open another without betraying the one before. You are allowed more than one great love. You are allowed to be new again, even after loss. And you are allowed to want joy, not just survival. They expected me at the front door with a suitcase. I walked past with a realtor. We docked in Seattle on a Tuesday morning, under a sky the color of wet cotton. Most people were already gripping phones, checking flights, booking rides, preparing to fold back into their old lives like nothing had shifted. But mine had. Irreversibly. I stood on the top deck, the breeze lifting the corners of my scarf, watching the shoreline rise slowly into view. Not as an ending, but as something newly possible. Clark came to stand beside me. He didn't speak for a while, then softly, "You've changed." I looked at him. Or maybe I said I've just finally stopped dimming the parts of me I used to keep quiet. He smiled like someone who understood more than he asked. When we hugged goodbye, it wasn't heavy. No promises, no plans. Just two people who'd witnessed each other's return to themselves. That was enough. I didn't call Rachel. Didn't head toward the suburbs. Didn't knock on any door that only opened when I was useful. Instead, I took a car to North Admiral, an old neighborhood perched above the bay where houses were still modest and porches still mattered. I met the realtor just after lunch. She wore all black and spoke with purpose. "I'm not downsizing," I told her. "I'm right-sizing." "For me." She raised an eyebrow, then smiled. We saw 3 homes. The third one had a rosemary bush outside the kitchen window and a crooked mailbox with no name yet. I knew before we stepped inside. It felt like a place no one else had already claimed. By Thursday, I signed the papers, used my own account, quietly, decisively. No co-signers, no explanations. It felt like putting a period at the end of a sentence I'd been forced to leave hanging for 20 years. I moved in with nothing more than 2 suitcases, 3 books, and a blue china cup that once belonged to Howard's mother. There was no need to call a moving truck. Turns out most of what I carried all those years wasn't furniture. It was responsibility dressed as permanence. On the 4th day, Rachel called. "Ezra said you're in Seattle," she said. "We assumed you'd come by." There was no anger in her voice, just expectation shaped over decades of habits I had helped create. "I'm not coming by," I said gently. "I'm not slipping back in." Silence. "Then I don't understand." "I know," I replied. "But I think you will. Eventually." I unpacked at my own pace. Books first. Then linens. Then the picture Ezra had drawn on the ship, a house with a garden and a smiling stick figure in a big hat. He'd written in shaky but careful letters, "Grandma's New World." I framed it and placed it in the entryway, right where the light hit in the afternoon. I didn't decorate the guest room, didn't buy toys just in case, didn't leave drawers empty for others to fill. This house wasn't a stage. It was sanctuary, a place not to wait for visitors but to finally welcome myself. They expected me at the front door with a suitcase. I walked past with a realtor. We docked in Seattle on a Tuesday morning under a sky the color of wet cotton. Most people were already gripping phones, checking flights, booking rides, preparing to fold back into their old lives like nothing had shifted. But mine had, irreversibly. I stood on the top deck, the breeze lifting the corners of my scarf, watching the shoreline rise slowly into view, not as an ending, but as something newly possible. Clark came to stand beside me. He didn't speak for a while. Then softly, "You've changed." I looked at him. "Or maybe," I said, "I've just finally stopped dimming the parts of me I used to keep quiet." He smiled like someone who understood more than he asked. When we hugged goodbye, it wasn't heavy. No promises. No plans. Just 2 people who'd witnessed each other's return to themselves. That was enough. I didn't call Rachel. Didn't head toward the suburbs. Didn't knock on any door that only opened when I was useful. Instead, I took a car to North Admiral, an old neighborhood perched above the bay, where houses were still modest and porches still mattered. I met the realtor just after lunch. She wore all black and spoke with purpose. "I'm not downsizing," I told her. "I'm right-sizing. For me." She raised an eyebrow, then smiled. We saw 3 homes. The third one had a rosemary bush outside the kitchen window and a crooked mailbox with no name yet. I knew before we stepped inside. It felt like a place no one else had already claimed. By Thursday, I signed the papers, used my own account, quietly, decisively. No co-signers, no explanations. It felt like putting a period at the end of a sentence I'd been forced to leave hanging for 20 years. I moved in with nothing more than 2 suitcases, 3 books, and a blue china cup that once belonged to Howard's mother. There was no need to call a moving truck. Turns out, most of what I carried all those years wasn't furniture. It was responsibility dressed as permanence. On the fourth day, Rachel called. "Ezra said you're in Seattle," she said. "We assumed you'd come by." There was no anger in her voice. Just expectation shaped over decades of habits I had helped create. "I'm not coming by," I said gently. "I'm not slipping back in." Silence. "Then I don't understand." "I know," I replied. "But I think you will. Eventually." I unpacked at my own pace. Books first, then linens, then the picture Ezra had drawn on the ship, a house with a garden and a smiling stick figure in a big hat. He'd written in shaky but careful letters, "Grandma's New World." I framed it and placed it in the entryway, right where the light hit in the afternoon. I didn't decorate the guest room, didn't buy toys just in case, didn't leave drawers empty for others to fill. This house wasn't a stage, it was sanctuary, a place not to wait for visitors, but to finally welcome myself.